In the annals of American military history, some battles are etched into the national consciousness: Yorktown, Gettysburg, Normandy. Others, despite their pivotal importance, fade into obscurity, overshadowed by grander events. On this windswept spit of sand, guarding the entrance to Mobile Bay, one such story unfolded: a tale of defiance, folly, revenge, and irony. This is the story of Fort Bowyer, a humble bastion of logs and sand that twice faced the might of the British Empire in the final forgotten chapter of the War of 1812. The War of 1812 was a sprawling, multifaceted conflict. While battles raged along the Canadian border and ships dueled on the high seas, the British High Command eyed a strategic backdoor into the young American Republic, the Gulf Coast. After Napoleon's defeat in Europe in the spring of 1814, Britain was free to concentrate its military might on the war in America, and it turned its attention south. Control of the Gulf meant control of the Mississippi River, the economic artery of the American frontier. The ultimate prize was New Orleans, a critical port for all trade west of the Appalachian Mountains. But the gateway to that prize, the key to crippling the American South, was the city of Mobile. The British plan was clear: take Fort Bowyer, seize Mobile, and march overland to Natchez. This would sever Louisiana's trade with the East Coast and cut off New Orleans from the north, effectively dismembering the United States. The Gulf Coast campaign was no mere sideshow. It was a critical component of Britain's endgame strategy, a move that could have fundamentally altered the nation's westward expansion. The stage for this conflict had been set in April 1813, when American forces under General James Wilkinson seized Mobile from the Spanish, who were allied with the British, making its defense an urgent American priority. To defend this vital waterway, the Americans erected Fort Bowyer on Mobile Point in 1813. It was not a formidable stone fortress in the European style, but a semi-permanent fortification of logs and sand. A classic example of the American frontier military ethos of making do with what was available. Its fan-shaped design faced the sea channel, with a crescent-shaped bastion mounting between 14 and 20 cannons to command the narrow entrance to Mobile Bay. Despite its immense strategic importance, the fort was briefly abandoned in the early summer of 1814, a telling sign of the overstretched and under-resourced American military. It was only when the threat of a British invasion became imminent that General Andrew Jackson, the newly appointed commander of the region, recognized the danger. In August 1814, he ordered the fort to be re-garrisoned and strengthened, dispatching a small force to hold the key to the Gulf at all costs. The fort's very existence, hastily built, abandoned, and then hastily reoccupied, highlighted the reactive and often desperate nature of the American war effort.
In September 1814, Royal Navy Captain William Percy led a squadron of 4 warships, HMS Hermes, HMS Sophie, HMS Karen, and HMS Childers, to seize the fort. Accompanying him was the fiery Lieutenant Colonel Edward Nichols, a decorated Royal Marine known as Fighting Nichols, leading a land force of 60 Royal Marines and approximately 120 to 180 Red Stick Creek and Seminole allies. These Native American warriors were eager for revenge against the Americans after their recent defeat by Andrew Jackson in the Creek War. The British were confident, believing the fort was weak and its garrison small. Their combined land and sea operation was a textbook military strategy, but it was predicated on arrogance and fatally flawed intelligence. They fundamentally underestimated both the American defenders and the treacherous geography of Mobile Point. Inside Fort Bowyer was Major William Lawrence of the 2nd U.S. Infantry. He commanded a small garrison of just 160 men. They were isolated, vastly outnumbered, and facing a Royal Navy squadron. Their greatest asset was not their numbers, but their determination, their well-sighted artillery, and the sand walls of their fort. These were not elite troops, but regulars defending their own soil, embodying the citizen soldier ideal of the young republic. Their impending victory would not be of superior technology, but of superior positioning, discipline under fire, and the critical failures of their opponents. The attack began on September 14th, with Nichols's land force being easily repulsed by the American garrison. The next day, Captain Percy's ships moved in for the kill, but the shallow waters and fickle winds immediately hampered the attack. Only HMS Hermes and HMS Sophie could get close enough to engage the fort effectively. For 2 hours, the fort and the ships traded cannon fire. Then disaster struck the British. A shot from the fort severed the Hermes's anchor cable. The flagship swung helplessly into the channel and ran aground, a sitting duck under the American guns. Major Lawrence's artillerymen seized the opportunity, pouring a severe raking fire into the crippled vessel. With his ship being systematically destroyed and a third of his crew dead or wounded, Captain Percy made the agonizing decision to abandon ship. He and his surviving crew were rescued by boats from the Sophie, and Percy himself set his flagship ablaze to prevent its capture. Around 10 p.m., the fire reached the powder magazine. The resulting explosion was seen and heard for miles, a spectacular and humiliating end to the British attack. The British had lost their flagship and suffered over 70 casualties. The Americans, just 10. Mobile was safe, for now. The stunning American defense had not only saved a vital port, but it had forced the British to completely rethink their Gulf Coast strategy, leading them directly to their ill-fated campaign at New Orleans. 5 months later, in February 1815, the situation was reversed. In January, Andrew Jackson had won his legendary victory at the Battle of New Orleans. Smarting from that catastrophic defeat, the British Expeditionary Force, now under the command of the more methodical General John Lambert, sailed east. Their target was the same small fort that had defied them before. But this time, they would not repeat their mistakes. This time, they brought an army of 5,000 veteran troops and a massive fleet of 38 ships. In the interim, General Jackson had ordered Fort Bowyer's defenses strengthened, increasing the garrison to 375 men of the 2nd U.S. Infantry under the now Lieutenant Colonel William Lawrence. Jackson boasted that 10,000 men cannot take it. That claim was about to be put to the test. On February 8, 1815, Lambert's forces landed east of the fort and began a formal siege. This was not the rash assault of the previous September. It was a professional application of overwhelming force, demonstrating the British Army's ability to learn from failure. Royal Engineers, under the command of Colonel Burgoyne, methodically dug trenches through the sand dunes, moving closer to the fort's vulnerable landward side each night under the cover of darkness and constant American fire. They established batteries for their heavy cannon, mortars, and Congreve rockets, slowly tightening the noose around the American garrison. Inside the fort, the defenders, along with some 20 women and 16 children, could only watch as the British lines crept ever closer. For 5 days, Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence and his 370 men held out. But with British trenches just yards from his walls and their heavy guns poised to pulverize his sand and log defenses, the situation was hopeless. On February 12th, facing a demand for surrender from General Lambert to avoid a needless slaughter, Lawrence consulted his officers. Recognizing the futility of further resistance against an overwhelming force, he surrendered the fort. General Jackson, far away in New Orleans, would later express his disappointment, but for the men on the ground, the choice was between surrender and annihilation. The British victory was complete. They now controlled the gateway to Mobile, but it was a hollow triumph. Just 2 days after the surrender, on February 14th, a British ship arrived with staggering news. A peace treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, had been signed in Europe on Christmas Eve 1814. The war had been over for nearly 2 months. The Battle of New Orleans, the siege of Fort Bowyer, all the death and destruction of the Gulf Campaign's final weeks had occurred after the diplomats had declared peace. The slow pace of 19th century communication had allowed the fighting to outpace the peacemaking. The last land battle of the War of 1812 had been fought and won for absolutely nothing. Why is the epic victory at New Orleans celebrated in song and story, while the dogged defense and eventual fall of Fort Bowyer is largely forgotten? The answer lies in the power of national narrative. New Orleans was a stunning, improbable victory that redeemed a war filled with American defeats and humiliations, like the burning of Washington, D.C. It made Andrew Jackson a national hero and fueled a new wave of American nationalism. The story of Fort Bowyer is more complex. A brilliant victory followed by an inevitable defeat, all rendered moot by a peace treaty signed an ocean away. The historical memory of the Gulf Campaign is a classic example of how a single dramatic event can eclipse a broader, more complex strategic reality. News of Jackson's triumph and the peace treaty reached the American public at roughly the same time, allowing the nation to celebrate the victory and largely ignored the subsequent defeat. This selective memory transformed a negotiated stalemate into a triumphant American victory, shaping the narrative of the war's end for generations to come. The British withdrew and Fort Bowyer was returned to American control. It was later replaced by the massive brick fortification that stands here today, Fort Morgan, but the ghosts of 1814 and 1815 remain. They are the ghosts of American soldiers who, in a small sand fort, handed the Royal Navy a stunning defeat. And they are the ghosts of the men on both sides who fought and died in the war's final futile battle, unaware that the diplomats had already declared peace. Their story is a powerful reminder that history is not just a tale of famous victories, but of forgotten struggles, of strategic blunders, and of the enduring irony of war.